Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Ben Francis and first we'll move to the Ukraine update. Two Ukrainian security officers have been detained over an alleged Russian assassination plot against the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, has said it had exposed a network of agents run by Russia's FSB that also intended to kill Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Krylo Budanov, and the SBU's head, Vasily Maluku. The plans included finding someone in the presidential entourage to capture and kill Zelensky, the SBU said, and to kill Budanov and others with a missile strike, kamikaze drones launched locally, then another missile strike to destroy the evidence of the drones. The SBU named three FSB intelligence officers behind the operation as Maxim Mishustin, Dmytro Perlin, and Alexei Kornev. In intercepted messages, Perlin referred to the missile attack on Budanov as a, quote, big bird, and the drone as a, quote, small bird. He emphasized, quote, the order is rocket, drone, rocket. The SBU said it recovered drones, warheads, and mines from one of the arrested Ukrainians' alleged accomplices. He and others face charges of treason and terrorism in Ukraine. Ukrainian prosecutors say they have examined debris from 21 of around 50 North Korean ballistic missiles launched by Russia between late December and late February. The office of the chief prosecutor, Andrei Kostin, told reporters that the missiles' failure rate appeared to be high. Quote, about half of the North Korean missiles lost their program trajectories and exploded in the air. In such cases, the debris was not recovered. Use of North Korean missiles by Russia threatened the nearly two-decade consensus among permanent members of the United Nations Security Council on preventing North Korea from expanding its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Russia recently vetoed the annual renewal of UN sanctions monitoring of North Korea. Russia has been shipping refined petroleum to North Korea at levels that appear to violate the mandates of the Security Council, a U.S. official said today, adding that the U.S. was planning new sanctions in response. The U.S. would continue working with other countries to impose sanctions, quote, against those working to facilitate arms and refined petroleum transfers between Russia and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, end quote. Romanian President Klaus Iohannis has said he is open to discussing sending a Patriot system to Ukraine after German appeals to EU and NATO member states. Iohannis met with President Biden at the White House on Tuesday. On Tuesday, Ukrainian forces attacked an oil storage depot and sparked a large fire, injuring 5 people on the outskirts of the Russian-held city of Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, the region's leader has said. And onto the Israel-Gaza latest. At least 34,844 Palestinians have been killed and 78,404 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, Gaza's health ministry said in a statement today. President Biden's administration paused a shipment of weapons to Israel last week in opposition to apparent moves by the Israelis to invade the southern city of Rafah, a senior administration official news agency. The official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that Israeli leaders seem to approach a decision on a Rafah incursion. Quote, we began to carefully review proposed transfers of particular weapons to Israel that might be used in Rafah, end quote, beginning in April. An Israeli official told Reuters that Israel sees no sign of a breakthrough in Egyptian-mediated talks on a truce with Hamas that would free some Gaza hostages, but is keeping its delegation of what describes as, quote, mid-level negotiators in Cairo for now. Israel will not agree to end the war and leave Hamas in power, an Israeli government spokesman reiterated today. Hamas said its fighters were battling Israeli troops in the east of Rafah. Hospitals in the southern Gaza Strip have only 3 days of fuel left due to closed border crossings, Tedros Adhanom, the head of the World Health Organization, said today. Tedros also said Al-Najjar, one of the 3 hospitals in Rafah, was no longer functioning due to the ongoing hostilities in the vicinity and the military operation in Rafah. Medical sources have told Al Jazeera that over the past 24 hours, the Kuwaiti hospital, one of the few hospitals in Rafah still in operation, had recorded 129 injured patients and the bodies of 35 people killed. Qatar today called on the international community to prevent a, quote, genocide in Rafah after Israel's seizure of the Gaza city's crossing with Egypt and threat of a wider assault. The coordination of government activities in the territories, COGAT, the Israeli military body in charge of Palestinian civil affairs, said the Karim Shalom crossing reopened early today, but no aid had entered it as of midday. UN agencies have been forced to ration fuel which is imported through Rafah. Aid for Gaza was being loaded on to a ship in Cyprus today in what was expected to be the first cargo to be delivered using a US pier built to expedite supplies to Gaza. The United Arab Emirates said today that it strongly condemns Israel's takeover of the Rafah border crossing on the Palestinian side and warned of the consequences of any military escalation. In a new report, Human Rights Watch, HRW, has said that the, quote, Israeli security forces have unlawfully used lethal force in fatal shootings of Palestinians in the West Bank, end quote. Police began clearing a pro-Palestinian tent encampment at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. today. Now onto our first story, John Swinney, and main story of the night, John Swinney introduces his new cabinet. After being formally sworn in as First Minister this morning, John Swinney returned to the House to work on makeup of his new cabinet. Shona Robson chose to step down as Deputy First Minister and formally tendered her resignation to the First Minister. She remains in the cabinet. Mr. Swinney has appointed Kate Forbes to take over as Deputy First Minister. Late in the afternoon, the First Minister announced his new Scottish cabinet, which he said will help drive real and urgent progress in eradicating child poverty, driving economic growth, and tackling the climate emergency. The cabinet of 11, with a majority of women, is as follows. Kate Forbes, the youngest ever Deputy Prime Minister, will take on the economy portfolio. Deputy First Minister, will take on the economy portfolio and responsibility for Gaelic. Shona Robinson remains in cabinet with responsibility for finance and local government. Jenny Gilruth remains cabinet secretary for education and skills. Angela Constance remains cabinet secretary for justice and home affairs. Maria McCallan remains in cabinet with responsibility for net zero and energy. Fiona Hislop remains cabinet secretary for transport. Neil Gray remains cabinet secretary for health and social care. Shirley Ann Somerville remains cabinet secretary for social justice. Angus Robertson remains cabinet secretary for constitution, external affairs and culture, and Maria Gauguin remains cabinet secretary for rural affairs, for rural affairs, land reform and islands. The First Minister said, quote, ahead of my appointment as First Minister, I committed to working collaboratively across the Parliament to address the pressing issues facing the people of Scotland. With that in mind, I have selected a cabinet team that blends experience and energy with a strong focus on the priorities my government will pursue: eradicating child poverty, driving economic growth, meeting climate change obligations, and investing in our vital public services. My overriding priority will be to work to eradicate child poverty in Scotland, an issue which real progress has been made through measures such as the Scottish Child Payment. The government elite will maximise every lever at our disposal to tackle the scourge of poverty in our country. A strong economy supports the delivery of services on which people depend: health, education, housing, and transport. And so each of these areas are aligned to distinct roles in my cabinet, with a focus on ensuring people see their lives improve as a result of the actions of their Scottish Government. Quote, I believe that Scotland's future is best served as an independent country, but I recognise more people need to be convinced of that before independence can be achieved. My cabinet will also focus efforts on reaching out to those who remain unconvinced, with respect and courtesy, to ensure that the people of Scotland have the democratic right to choose their own future. And now for our next story, Tory MP for Dover, Natalie Elphicke, crosses floor to join Sir Keir Starmer on Labour benches. The Conservative MP for Dover has staged a dramatic defection to the Labour Party, saying her former party has become, quote, a byword for incompetence and division. Natalie became the second Tory MP to switch parties in 2 weeks, in another major blow to Rishi Sunak, as she crossed the floor of the Commons before Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, in a move that took Westminster by surprise and went down badly with some Labour MPs owing to her, quote, hard-right views. Elphicke said the UK needed to move on from Sunak's, quote, tired and chaotic government, accusing the Prime Minister of failing on borders and security. The SNP's Westminster leader has challenged Sir Keir Starmer on his party's values after Labour welcomed what Mr Flynn described as, quote, one of the most right-wing Tory MPs into the Labour fold. In a letter to the Labour leader, Stephen Flynn asked if the values of Natalie, the second Tory MP to defect to Labour in a fortnight, were now the values of the Labour Party. While a Conservative MP, Mrs Elphicke, sorry I can't pronounce that name very well, has, quote, Elphicke, has been suspended from the House of Commons for trying to influence a judge presiding over a sexual assault trial of her ex-husband, Charlie Elphicke. Following Charlie Elphicke's conviction, Natalie Elphicke claimed her sex offender ex-husband had been punished for being, quote, attractive to women. She's also used a debate on P&O's mass and completely unjustified sacking of 800 workers to attack trade unions, suggested Marcus Rashford missed his penalty in the Euros 2020 final because he was too focused on his free school meals campaign, backed Boris Johnson, endorsed Liz Truss, and voted against a ceasefire in Gaza. Commenting, Stephen Flynn MP said, quote, This latest lurch to the right of UK politics by the Labour Party will shock hard-working families across these aisles. Quote, at a time when the public are crying out for change, we have the Labour Party taking on an MP who both actively campaigned for both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So on to our next story. Former leader Kezia Duckdale warns Scottish Labour could scrap tuition fees. Former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Duckdale has said that a future Labour administration in Scotland would have to make, quote, dramatic changes on public spending, such as ending like free prescriptions, free personal care, free tuition fees, and new child payments. Speaking on the latest episode of the Power Test podcast, Ms Duckdale argued that the widening gap between government spending and revenue in Scotland means that something is going to have to give with respect to funding the Scottish public sector. The SNP have called out Labour's plans for Scotland and challenged Anna Sarwar to disown the ideas from the senior members of his party. The SNP say that since they abolished Labour's backdoor tuition fees in 2007, the number of Scottish students entering university has grown by 31%, and the number of students from our deprived backgrounds going to university is at record highs. Former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, has also suggested that Labour should scrap Social Security Scotland and have benefits once again delivered by the cruel Department of Work and Pensions. This is despite S&P government policies delivered through Social Security Scotland, such as the Scottish Child Payment, lifting an estimated 100,000 children out of poverty this year. The SNP have called on Anand Sarwar to say over whether he would reimpose tuition fees and scrap Social Security Scotland. Commenting, SNP MSP Claire Hauge said, quote, Senior Labour figures call for tuition fees to be reimposed, and Sarawar must urgently clarify whether that is the position of his party. Quote, what is even more incredible is the call to scrap Social Security Scotland, a department that under the SNP will lift 100,000 children out of poverty this year. The contrast with the cruel DWP couldn't be clearer. Ms. Hoggery said, quote, under the SNP government, the priorities of the people of Scotland, such as tackling child poverty and widening access to education, will always be put first. And on to our next story. 1 in 5 households in energy debt are being forced to turn to illegal moneylenders. New analysis from the Warm This Winter campaign has found that almost 1 in 5 households who are currently in energy debt are being forced to turn to illegal money lending. The analysis also shows that among younger households, a quarter, 24%, of those in debt who are under 35 have turned to illegal money lending, and 1/3, 32%, of those aged between 35 and 44 have also been forced into using illegal loan sharks. It is estimated that in the next 12 months, illegal debt will rise amongst both age groups, leaving 2/3 of households looking at alternative options including credit cards, 27%, borrowing from the family, 20%, or using an overdraft, 14%. Dave Dugan, MP, the SNP's Energy Secretary and Net Zero spokesperson, has said that only with the full power of a normal independent country can energy-rich Scotland eradicate energy debt for good. Commenting, Dave Dugan MP said, quote, the fact that households in energy-rich Scotland find themselves in energy debt is a scandal that is entirely of Westminster's making. Quote, Scotland has an abundance of energy that could support every household in Scotland, yet, because of the economic mismanagement of Westminster, households find themselves fuel poor. Quote, successive UK governments have exploited Scotland's vast energy resources to bolster UK finances. He said that Scotland had the energy, we just need the power. Unions concerned about Sir Keir Starmer watering down workers' rights policies. Trade union leaders are planning to meet Keir Starmer next week after several unions warning over changes to the party's workers' rights policy. Union leaders have demanded that there should be no watering down of what has been pledged. Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, has said businesses would have, quote, nothing to fear from the changes, end quote, which were originally to include ending enforced zero-hour contracts and, quote, day one protections from unfair dismissal. Responding to the General Secretary of the Unite Union, describing Keir Starmer's New Deal for Workers policy as, quote, unrecognisable, SNP MP Chris Stevens said, quote, the General Secretary's response to Sir Keir Starmer's watered-down New Deal for Workers policy is damning analysis of the party's flagship policy. Quote, despite shouting from the heavens about how his party will deliver real change to workers, Keir Starmer has once again abandoned a key pledge the closer he gets to power. Quote, with a general election looming, it's clear that whether we have a Labour or Tory government, Westminster does not offer the change Scotland needs. And to our next story, NGOs say increasing number of migrants trapped in Yemen face abuse and starvation. According to the international NGOs and civil society organizations based in Yemen, the number of African migrants stranded in the southern Arab state, many of whom endure, quote, horrifying and brutal violence while trapped there, is reaching critical levels. The International Organization for Migration put a warning this week about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. leading a call for urgent funding to support the, quote, safe and voluntary return of migrants to their countries of origin. The intervention followed a number of fatal boat journeys last month from Djibouti, a major transit point for people leaving the Horn of Africa, many of whom are attempting to get to Saudi Arabia, the Arab world's largest economy and world's third most popular destination for migrants. Quote, as migration flows continue to surge, the demand for safe and dignified return options for migrants has reached critical levels, end quote, said Matt Hopper, IOM's acting chief of mission in Yemen. The IOM estimated there were 308,000 migrants in the country currently. And on to the next story. Scottish Government support for action on antimicrobial resistance. The Scottish Government is supporting a new UK-wide joint action plan to contain and control resistance to antibiotics. Antimicrobial resistance, AMR, is listed among the World Health Organization's top global public health threats and arises when organisms that cause infection evolve ways to survive antibiotic treatment. It is estimated AMR directly causes over 1.2 million deaths globally and 7,600 deaths in the UK alone each year, at a cost of at least £180 million annually to the NHS within the UK. The AMR National Action Plan sets out key measures to reduce the threat of infection across human, animal, environmental, and food sectors. These include optimizing the use of antibiotics, investing in innovation and technology, and working collaboratively with key global partners. Through a collaborative approach across the UK, the action plan builds on the achievements and lessons learned from the first version of the plan and will run from 2024 until 2029. Health Secretary Neil Gray said, quote, the emergence of resistant infection is one of the greatest health threats of our time. Antimicrobial resistance is already causing people to suffer longer illnesses, which are more difficult to treat, a position that will only worsen without collective action to contain it. Quote, this new national action plan will be crucial in our fight to control the threat of AMR. If we achieve the 9 strategic outcomes set out in the plan, we will take a major step towards our 20-year vision to contain AMR by 2040. And on to our next story. University of Glasgow spin-out secures £3.2 million investment to transform robotic-assisted surgery. A spin-out business at the University of Glasgow is celebrating after securing more than £3.2 million in grant and investment funding. NAMI Surgical said the double catch injection, quote, marked a significant milestone, end quote, in its journey towards revolutionizing surgical technologies. The young company was started in December 2021 by entrepreneurial researcher Nico Fennew and Rebecca Cleary. In that time, it has developed advances in cutting-edge ultrasonic surgical instrumentation for use in robotic-assisted surgery which it says are ready to go out to the market. The new funding has come in the form of £2.5 million investment round and the successful award of an Innovation UK grant of £702,000 under the Biomedical Catalyst 2023 Round 2 industry-led R&D competition. The investment funding is courtesy of EOS Advisory £1.29 million, Maven Capital £635,000, SIS Ventures £250,000, and Scottish Enterprise £325,000. Nico Fennew said, quote, this funding marks a significant milestone in our journey towards revolutionizing ultrasonic surgical technologies and will significantly contribute to the development and realization of our vision within the surgical field, Quote, small investments, including by the university and public grants, have kept us going up until this point, but this is our first seed round, which will allow us to move away from the university, hire 10 more people, and take this technology forward and become profitable. We are delighted to have secured Scottish Government investors for this round and are grateful for their support and trust. End quote. Mel Anderson, head of IP and commercialization at the University of Glasgow, said, quote, this funding round is a great achievement by the NAMI team led by Nico Fenu. The company is commercializing innovation that will have a significant impact on the surgical field and ultimately benefit many patients worldwide. And on to our next story, launch of a new European campaign to support Scotland at EU elections. In Rome today, Grassroots Initiative, Europe for Scotland, EFS, is launching a new campaign to raise awareness about Scotland during the upcoming EU elections, the first where Scottish and UK citizens will not be able to vote following Brexit. Andrea Pizarro, Italian coordinator of the campaign, explained that Europe for Scotland is led by individuals from across Europe who recognise the democratic injustice of Brexit and stand in solidarity with the people of Scotland. While people in England and Wales narrowly opted to give up their seat in Europe, Scots have been deprived of a voice against their clear democratic will. He said that Scotland's pro-European stance is not surprising, as at least for the last half a century, Scotland has been more aligned with Europe than it has with Westminster. He pointed to the UK's increasingly less democratic outlook and compared it to Scotland's different view on Brexit, which he said has been ignored for too long. EFS say they agree with newly appointed First Minister John Swinney, who said the decisions passed in Westminster have had disastrous consequences for Scotland, first and foremost Brexit. According to EFS activist Sarah DeSanctis, it is not just a matter of democratic injustice, but Scotland's return to EU would be beneficial to Europe as well. In DeSanctis' view, Scotland's re-entry to the EU could also help counteract far-right tribalism. Quote, Scotland's vision of nationalism rooted in inclusivity and openness offers a refreshing contrast to the diverse and isolationist rhetoric prevailing today. She said she also underlined the importance of Scottish exports to the EU, valued at €16.7 billion in 2020, and in particular, the potential for renewable energy like wind power, which is crucial for European energy security and climate goals. EFS say this is why European citizens have decided to make Scotland's voice heard during this election campaign. Importantly, after many years of status, the EU is expanding again. Open accession talks are underway with Ukraine, Moldova, Bosnia, and many more European countries. European enlargement is a great opportunity to bring attention to Scotland's unique situation, its place in Europe, and the democratic injustices it faces. Quote, we will activate our network of activists around 17 European states to garner support for prospective MEPs through statements of solidarity to make sure Scotland is not forgotten by the next EU Parliament, end quote, says Janine Jetter, Germany's coordinator of the campaign. Well, that is all I've got time for this evening, but before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programme will always be free to view, however, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.